Alex, who is 10 years old and profoundly autistic, has the dubious honor of being Sid Baker's worst patient. He is also Dr. Marvin Boris's worst patient, and he's also Arthur Krigsman's worst patient. In fact, Alex is the patient from hell. Better put, maybe, Alex was the patient in hell. Nothing ever made Alex get better. He's famous in Dan circles for being the kid who only ever got worse. We've done the Dan protocol backwards and forwards, time and time again. In fact, we've done everything from cranial sacral therapy to Chinese medicine to crystals. We've seen a doctor who told us that Alex was autistic because his sternum was too tight. And we've flown to Ireland twice to see a healer. Alex has always had terrible gastrointestinal problems, including severe diarrhea, vomiting, gas, and bloating. His immune suppression was so severe that he's had to have gamma globulin IVs every 3 weeks for the last 7 years of his life. Prior to those IVs, he spent his life in bed with fevers, rashes, and vomiting. But in spite of this, he's always been a very sweet and very loving boy. Every intervention we tried had, at best, no effect, but most things actually made him worse. By the summer of 2002, when Alex was 8 years old, with his health and his behavior worsening, we continued our descent towards the lowest level of hell. He'd not only developed horrible self-abusive behavior, scratching and biting himself so that he was always covered in blood, but he was also hitting himself against the furniture until he was bruised all over. Then he started to break things in the house. First, it was just remote controls. If you left a remote control out for a few seconds, it would be smashed into pieces. But then we moved up to telephones, answering machines, and by November of 2002, Alex was taking out our televisions, our computers, furniture, ripping the pictures off the wall and smashing the glass. He's not really verbal, so he couldn't tell me what was happening, but I knew. I knew that he was in agony, and the behaviors were his only way of begging me for help. Sid sent me to Arthur Krigsman, who found that Alex not only had lymphoid nodular hypoplasia, but also colitis and cryptitis. When I first saw Andrew Wakefield speak at a Dan conference in 1998, I knew what I would find if Alex were ever scoped, but it took me 5 years to find a doctor who would scope him. I just want to thank Arthur Krigsman and Andrew Wakefield for being right and for helping us. We immediately began to treat Alex's gut condition aggressively. With his first dose of prednisone, thank you, Dr. Boris, he stopped breaking things and he's never broken anything since, but he wasn't getting better. If we even tried to lower his dose of prednisone, his colitis would flare up and he'd need to use the toilet 15 or more times a day. We couldn't actually go anywhere because of Alex's constant need for a bathroom. In September of 2003, just 7 months ago, we finally hit rock bottom. Alex was doing horribly in every respect. His bowels were a disaster. In spite of being on prednisone, 6-MP, gastrocome, Prilosec, and Colazol. He was eating maybe one meal every other day and was sick constantly. His teachers at school told me that they were not even going to bother to try to teach him anymore because he was in so much pain that he couldn't sit still for more than a second or two. They said they were going to just try to make him more comfortable with sensory input and the like. And then Arthur Krigsman called me and said I had to take Alex off of prednisone because he'd been on so much that it was becoming dangerous. Without prednisone, of course, I knew he'd be back to smashing things within days. I agreed to come up here today in spite of being absolutely terrified. Firstly, because I figured it would be like standing in front of 1,000 of my best friends. And also, I was afraid that there was somebody out there who may have reached that point that I reached, where I thought, why don't I just take Alex and jump off a bridge because it'll put him out of his agony. And since I can't live without him, it would also put me out of my agony. And I can't bear the thought of any of you feeling like I did this past September. On that day, Arthur called me to tell me to take Alex off of prednisone. On that rock bottom day, I remembered something that has finally put Alex on an uphill course. I remembered that about 5 years ago at a Dan conference, a stranger came up to me and told me about a wonderful diet she was doing with her child that had done remarkable things for him. It was called the Specific Carbohydrate Diet. She recommended that I buy a book called Breaking the Vicious Cycle by Elaine Gottschall. I listened to her enough to buy the book, but I had a list from Alex's doctors of about 100 things long to do, and I forgot about it. I forgot about it until that day. And on that day, I pulled that book off my bookshelf, and I read the first chapter, and by the time I finished that first chapter, I knew that was my only and my last chance. And I also knew somehow that it was going to work. I started the diet by dinner that night. It may have been the one intelligent decision I ever made. And now to bring you to this present day, 7 months later. Alex is now off all his medications and having only 1 or 2 formed bowel movements a day. He has not vomited once since I started him on the diet. He is off gamma globulin and healthier than he's ever been. In fact, his only illness in starting the diet was one cold this December. He's eating 2 to 3 full meals a day. His attention span has increased dramatically as his hyperactivity and self-stimulatory behaviors have decreased. He's starting to talk more, echoing what we say in an attempt to converse. His teachers are awed. They're not only once again able to have him sit at a desk and learn, but they're actually getting literally 3 times the amount of material done in a month that they were before the diet. All his obsessive behaviors are gone, and all his self-abusive behaviors are gone. Most importantly, Alex is happier and healthier than he's been since he was an infant before he regressed into autism. I don't know how far Alex will go on SCD. However, as he is no longer in screaming agony, I can afford to be a little more patient. Every week he is better than he was the one previous. I not only think that jumping off a bridge probably isn't such a great idea anymore, but I actually think that Alex's and my life are both worth living. Because Alex is finally the poster boy for something other than complete failure, Dr. Baker was kind enough to give me the honor of introducing our next speaker. Elaine Gottschall is the ultimate mother hero. When her own child was incredibly sick, she didn't take the word of the medical establishment, which would have had her 7-year-old daughter lose her large intestine, but she did whatever it took to heal her. And that something was finding the specific carbohydrate diet. She went back to school, graduated with a bachelor's degree at 52 years old and a master's degree at 59 years old, and then went on to write Breaking the Vicious Cycle so she could tell all of us about how we too could help ourselves and our children. I, for one, obviously, can never thank her enough for her efforts and for once again giving me hope. My SCD support group is called Dr. Moms. You probably have seen us walking around with our t-shirts. On Friday night, we presented Elaine with a little present, and Sid asked me to please share it with all of you. To the greatest Dr. Mom of them all, the top 10 reasons we love SCD and Dr. Moms. 10, you get to talk about your child's poop all day. 9, you get to talk about other kids' poops all day. 8, you get to bake muffins at 11 o'clock at night when you suddenly realize you don't have enough for the next day. 7, you get to meet a load of people just as insane as you and talk about poop all day. 6, you get to spend $1,500 a month on groceries, $1,400 of that just on almond flour. You get to know the people in your 5, you get to know the people in your health food store like family and tell them all about your kids' poop. 4, you rapidly become a 5-star chef. 3, you get to lord it over all your friends who still feed their kids crap like McDonald's. 2, you get to talk about your child's poop all day. And number 1, you get to see your child heal. Thank you, Elaine. With love, Dr. Moms.
Good morning. It's been a long, long journey, and I'm not talking about the flight from Toronto, Canada to Washington, D.C. But before I give you a few highlights of this 40-year odyssey I've been on, I'd like to express my appreciation to all of you, but a few people stand out. Dr. Rimland, thank you for taking the albatross of guilt from these courageous parents and for unrelentlessly pursuing the causes, and eventually we will find the cure for autism spectrum disorder. Dr. Sidney Baker, Dr. Sidney Baker, thank you for your loving, comfy, cozy invitation to come to Dan. Thank you for being this loving, wonderful man that I've gotten to know. Thank you for your doctor moms. I really am having the time of my life. And there's someone in the audience who does not want me to point to her, but I will tell you that there is a very bright, persistent mom out there of 3 autistic children who, her name is Mimi Clark, and unbeknown to me, 2 years ago, she started a support group for SCD called Elaine's Children. And when I heard about it, I tracked her down, and I think we had 30 people on that listserv. I think there are almost 100 as of today, and heaven only knows what's going to happen by next Monday. It was 1960 when I had a defining moment in my life. I was sitting in the head pediatric gastroenterologist's office at New York Cornell Medical Center with my 7.5-year-old daughter, and we were being prepped for surgery to have her colon removed. She had been diagnosed of having very severe, of course, ulcerative colitis 3 years before. Okay, thank you. And the medications had ceased to work, and he was going to make the arrangements for the surgery. Now, this was a child who, during the first 2 years of her life, had persistent and chronic and severe periods of diarrhea interjected with periods of severe constipation. By the time she was 2 years old, she began hemorrhaging from her nose. Spontaneously, we'd be out in the car singing and going to a picnic, and her nose would start bleeding, and many times we had to go to emergency and have it packed. By the time she was 3 years old, she began awakening at night with the most horrendous seizures. We would hear the earth-piercing shriek and would run up to find this beautiful little girl. Are we having problems? Okay. We would find her standing up in her bed, her eyes wide open, perspiration dripping down her face, thrashing at her own private demons, screaming that we were killing her. And it would take us an hour to calm her down and prevent her from hurting herself. And she'd fall asleep and not remember anything the next day. I don't know how we kept out of the hands of the psychiatrist, but within a few short months, the same child awakened at 2 in the morning, went into the washroom, sat there on the toilet until 8. And when I finally begged her to come back to bed, I went to flush the toilet, and it was filled with blood. And our nightmare started. We had gone to, in a period of these 2.5, 3 years, to 12, 15 different gastroenterologists, and they said if the medication didn't help, that surgery was imminent. And now I was sitting in this office and being told that, yes, we will schedule her for surgery. I began crying, and this doctor pointed his finger at me and said, "What are you crying about? You've done this to her." Yes, I know all about Bettelheim. At any rate, I went home and closed my bedroom door and cried and cried and couldn't stop. And then something interesting happened. A friend called, "May I come and just talk to you, Elaine?" "Oh, sure, Martha." And on her way up, she bumped into a third person and told her about me. And this woman said, "You have your friend call me, and I will give her the name of a doctor in New York City who saved our 2 celiac twins, saved their lives." And I jumped out of bed when Martha told me and got Dr. Sidney Valentine Haas on the telephone. And within 48 hours, carrying my latest hematology reports in one hand and stool culture reports in the other hand, we entered his office. And after a thorough examination, he sat me down and he said those very famous words, "Mrs. Gottschall, what are you feeding this child?" None of the 12 doctors, not only did they give me no information on diet, but when I asked about it, they said it had nothing to do with intestinal problems. And in fact, even today, were you to go to a gastroenterologist, most of them, not the ones here, and you ask them for your Crohn's disease and colitis, what to eat, doesn't make any difference. Food has nothing to do with it. He sat me down and I said, Dr. Haas, she's really not eating very much, and what she does eat goes right through her, or she throws it up. He said, okay, we're going to change all that. I want to tell you people who are struggling about whether to start SCD because you're afraid of it. This was a piece of cake. In 20 minutes, Dr. Haas gave me 1, 2, 3. Nothing written down, not even the yogurt recipe. He said, number 1, he said, you've got to get her off of all fluid milk, but because milk has so many good nutrients in it, protein and calcium, we will make our own yogurt. We'll ferment it 24 hours. You can make milkshakes with it. She can have natural cheeses. They have no lactose in it. He was concerned with carbohydrates. That was nothing. I could do that. Number 2, she cannot have any table sugar or nothing that has it in. That includes maple syrup, very natural product, but unfortunately, it has sucrose in it. She cannot have corn syrup, but she can have honey. Don't believe it when they tell you there is no difference between honey and sugar. The molecular structure is different. He told me that children for years, sick children, babies, were given honey because it requires no input from an injured intestinal surface. And it gives them energy, it gives them good palatable food. But the third thing he told me was a humdinger. She cannot have any potatoes or grains. I went home, and in the car on the way home, I thought, how am I going to bake for this child? How can I bake her birthday cakes and cookies? And I had an Austrian friend who made beautiful nut torts, and I called her up immediately. She said, put some pecans in the blender, grind them up, put some eggs in, put some honey in. You'll have great muffins. I did that. Had you put Judy on the diet immediately. Within 3 days, the night seizures went never to return. My daughter is 51 years old now. She has 2 beautiful children. That same gastroenterologist had advised me she'd never have children. We have 2 beautiful, thank God, grandchildren. And she's never had a return of the neurological symptoms. The colitis, we were out of the woods by the end of a year, and I caught my breath, and I had no formal university education, had graduated in '39 during the Depression from high school, but I started going to the Rutgers Medical Library. And within a half hour, I found on the current periodical stacks evidence of some of the things that Dr. Haas had told me about. For example, milk intolerance, the lactose intolerance, had been known since before the 1900s, and not one of these doctors had mentioned it to me. We had no Xerox machines. I copied it down quickly and brought it home to my very positive husband, who heard me say, I am so angry. We have known about this. It has been published from before 1900, and nobody told me. And then he said the famous words. He said, Elaine, you've always wanted to go to the university. There's one 20 minutes away, Montclair State. He said, get in there and find out what in the blankety blank is going on around here. He said, I have to stay home and make a living. Macho. So like a good wife in the 60s, I took off.
You're going to use this
Okay,
one.
thank you.
Well, the guy's recording.
Yeah, I'm going to need the mouse. Okay. And I spent 12 years there. And when I turned 60, I thought, well, I've had enough. I was halfway through a PhD. And I began teaching, doing consulting, and had garnered enough information to write my book. My search in the university had one goal, and that was to go on a treasure hunt and to find out how something as simple as a diet could reverse an incurable disease. That was my 12-year treasure hunt. So I'm going to cover in the next few minutes that I have just one of the gems that I found among the hundreds and hundreds of research reports which I've referenced in my book, which corroborates why this diet is working. Now, if somebody wants to develop another hypothesis, be my guest. This was the best that I could do with the information that I picked up. But before I go into this beautiful research report by Dr. Poley, I'd like to give you a little overview of the intestinal tract. Now, here's our little mousey. Here we go. In 1888, do I need it? Okay. Where is the arrow? Do you see the arrow? Okay. Okay, thank you. In 1888, Dr. G published in a paper called The Celiac Affliction, what the patient takes beyond his ability to digest does harm. Let's figure out where this harm can come from. We have here an oversimplified, simplistic drawing of the intestine or the digestive tract that goes from the mouth to the anus. We have salivary amylase from the mouth. We have pancreatic enzymes coming from the pancreas. We have some protein digestive enzymes coming from the stomach. We have, and all this gastrointestinal tract is trying to do is take the large food molecules, long chains of sugars that make up starch, long chains of amino acids that make up protein, and get them ready for the chief actor in my little drama, the intestinal absorptive cell. This is the cell that is my favorite cell in the whole wide world. And all the pancreas is trying to do, and all that the bile is trying to do, is to get everything in shape so that that gatekeeper, that gastrointestinal cell, can do the finishing touches on these molecules, which have now become shorter, because without the intestinal cell breaking apart the last vestiges of starch, the last vestiges of some proteins, these molecules cannot get into the bloodstream and nourish the rest of the organs of the body. The brain, which is the highest energy requiring cell, is screaming for energy. But unless the gastrointestinal tract prepares these molecules of food, which are loaded with energy, that energy cannot get to the brain. So it is with the other organs as well. And of course, the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the essential fatty acids, they too must pass through this gatekeeper cell, this gastrointestinal absorptive cell. Now, what happens if there's some impediment to these digestive processes? Well, we have a perfect example in cystic fibrosis of the pancreas. The pancreas is producing starch, fat, protein digestive enzymes that enter a duct and go into the small intestine and start working on the food. But in cystic fibrosis of the pancreas, that duct often gets plugged up with mucus. And these enzymes cannot reach the gastrointestinal tract, so these poor CF kids are skinny, malnourished, very sick. And they all have gut problems because what is happening to that energy that cannot nourish the brain, cannot nourish the liver? It doesn't get flushed down the toilet innocuously. It goes down to the unseen world of intestinal microbes and overfeeds them with all that energy that belongs in the body. And we have the Malthusian population theory of economics. More food, more entities, more people, more microbes. And when you get this overgrowth, and when you get a change in the acidity, which occurs because these bacteria, when they feed, will leave organic acids which raise the acidity of the colon. All kinds of things happen down there. You get mutations, you get additional toxins that would normally not enter the bloodstream, and some of them very well, and in fact there are many papers that show that one of the fermentation products, D-lactic acid, can get into the blood system and affect behavior in very dramatic ways. There are at least 20 references in my book about work that has been done for the last 30 years on D-lactic acid, which is a product of bacterial fermentation from carbohydrates. Okay, next one, please. This is to show you what the chain, I don't like this smells. Okay. Okay, this is a chain of the sugar molecules that make up starch. Starch is sugar. And if it's digested and goes through the gatekeeper cell of the intestinal surface, it provides energy. The sugars provide energy. But it's the same kind of sugar that you'd get in fruit. There's no difference. People who take their children off of fruit because of yeast infections and continue to give starch, I can't figure that one out. Okay. Now, after the pancreas and the other organs have worked on these long chains of proteins and and starch, usually presented to the intestinal cell is something called a disaccharide. Sucrose doesn't require any previous digestion. It is a disaccharide, and so it presents itself to the gatekeeper cell and asks to be cleaved so it can enter. It can't enter as a single unit. They must be single units to be transported across the intestinal mucosa into the bloodstream. Again, if this does not happen, okay, and that's okay. I just want to remind you, yes, this does not happen. They provide overfeeding for the intestinal microbes down here. Okay. The last, I just have summarized here oh, by the way, the butterfly. Why do I have the butterfly logo on all of these frames? Because more than one mother has come to me and said, my child is emerging from the cocoon and has become a beautiful butterfly. So I'm using, with all apologies to Microsoft, I'm using that logo. Okay, here we go. This is just a summary. It's in my book of starch digestion. And you can read this on your own. We eventually get polysaccharides, long chains, reduced down to the perfect form for transport, monosaccharides. If they do not get digested properly, here is a little diagram of what the microflora, the yeast and bacteria, do to it. Carbon dioxide gas has given up flatulence, hydrogen gas, methane gas, some of the organic acids that many of you know more about than I do. And what are they all doing for the microbes? They're giving them energy so that they can make more babies. Okay, this is the classical diagram of the gastrointestinal tract. I would only like to point out one thing here. Here at the junction of the small intestine and the beginning of the large intestine, down here where the appendix is, right in this ileocecal area is, I believe, where Dr. Wakefield found the lymphoid nodular hyperplasia. And I'm going to show you a picture of some of the lymph nodes down there when they have not overgrown and coalesced. Other than that, I don't think we have to dwell on here, other than the fact that Crohn's disease generally starts down in this area. The cecum, right here at the beginning of the colon, is where you get the greatest microbial growth in the whole gut. Now, this one is going to take a bit of explaining. If I took the small intestine and cut it across like an orange and looked at it through the light microscope, we would see, under small magnification, 100, 150, hills and valleys, hills and valleys. These hills and valleys are called villi, But we still, with a light microscope, cannot see this player that I'm talking about, the gatekeeper cell. We just can't see it there. They actually are on the top surface here, but you don't get a very good view of them. But I'm going to show you some electron micrographs of these cells in a minute. Right under here is something called the lamina propria, and there's a great deal of research going on right now looking at the number of lymphocytes, T cells, B cells, and how they change during certain conditions, or how they add up during certain conditions. So this is where a lot of research is being done on the immune system. And right under here as well, we have something called the lymph nodes, the Peyer's patches, which I'll show you in the next picture, but I'd like to point this out to you right now. If I had a picture that was stained properly, instead of seeing the same color along the surface here, showing the very small magnification of the intestinal cells, you would see red dots every so often if it were stained properly. And this is normal. These red dots are mucus-producing cells. They're called goblet cells. And in fact, right here, down here in the valleys, we have something called multipotent stem cells, which somehow are signaled by either the immune system or some other signaling mechanism. And if there is irritation, if there is any kind of irritation to the gut, these stem cells are signaled and told to produce more goblet cells than would be normal in order to lubricate the surface of the gut. Normally, these goblet cells will only produce enough mucus to protect the surface of the gut 2 millimeters thick. But just like I told you about the cystic fibrosis children, the subsequent drawings that I'm going to show you, or pictures that I'm going to show you, will show you that even without cystic fibrosis, we have abnormally thick layers of mucus because the stem cell has been stimulated to produce more goblet cells. Too many. Now, this is one of the Peyer's patches, and this is a fairly normal picture of the lymph node that is right under the intestinal cells that I showed you before. They lie under here. Most of the time, they're segregated down to the end of the small intestine at the ileum, but they can appear other places. And why are they there? They're there because in the wall of the ileum and occasionally elsewhere in the small intestine are aggregates of lymph nodules. All lymph nodules are placed so as to be exposed as extensively as possible to foreign antigens, which are invaders. They provide a line of defense behind these wet membranes. They lie mainly in the lamina propria, which I pointed out to you under the intestinal cells, directly under the intestinal absorptor cells, but often penetrate underlying layers of the gut into the muscle tissue of the gut, where they may spread and coalesce to a greater size. And I suspect that is what Dr. Wakefield found. Now, I don't know whether Dr. Wakefield has as yet explained the reason for them being there, but I would speculate that if they are fighting off an awful lot of invaders, they would act like thyroid cells that produce goiter, where in an effort to combat these invaders, more and more and more cells are produced. And in Dr. Wakefield's work, you see huge lumps of these nodules coalescing. Okay, here we have an electron micrograph of 3 of our stars of our performance, the intestinal gatekeeper cell. You can see the microvilli up here. Now, I want to orient you and make sure you understand the difference. This is high magnification. The picture I showed you before with the hills and valleys, they were villi. And that was low magnification. And in fact, it is a three-dimensional thing that I want you to think about, because although that picture showed you only a two-dimensional picture, actually these villi are covered by hundreds and thousands of these cells here. So we're going to hone in a minute and talk more about this intestinal cell, which in fact is covering every one of these villi. Do you get that? Because I even get confused sometimes because they both have projections, coming up, and you have to sort of orient yourself. What I'd like to point out here is do you see the two cell membranes that are adhering closely to each other? Well, they are held together in what we call tight junctions. It's almost like Velcro binding. We don't want those to open up. But unfortunately, we've all heard about leaky gut, and sometimes they do open up. And the three reasons that I've heard for their opening up are excess ingestion of alcohol, which our children are not involved in, an excess ingestion of NSAID drugs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which we're not worried about. And guess what the third reason is? Bacterial overgrowth on the top of the mucosal surface. They will open up as a result of bacterial overgrowth on the top of the intestinal surface. We don't want these junctions to open up, but unfortunately they appear to be doing that. And when they do, all kinds of things can slip in. Proteins that aren't digested properly, all kinds of things. Here is a greater magnification of our intestinal cell with just the top, the microvilli, which contain the enzymes sucrose, lactase, isomaltase, and maltase. And guess what's right next door to it? It's a goblet cell producing mucus. You can almost see the mucus being spurted out. In normal conditions, 2 millimeter thick layer. In abnormal conditions, globs of it. Here we see the tight junction even better. It's nicely sealed up by its desmosomes. Now I'm going to take you on a three-dimensional view of what I've been talking about. It's research done by Dr. J. Rayner Poley, Chief of Pediatrics and Electron Microscopy, Eastern Virginia Medical School, and Children's Hospital at King's Daughters, Norfolk. Is anyone here from Norfolk? Because I've tried to get in touch with Dr. Poley, and I've been unsuccessful. I don't know if he's still there. I found this paper in the late 1970s. He took a total of 62 patients between the ages of 5 months and 11 years that underwent small bowel biopsy, and then as controls, he had 7 children without diarrhea, and they served as controls. In some cases, biochemical assays of disaccharidase, the enzymes on the microvilli, activity he found them to be normal. That means that they should be able to digest all these carbs and transport them. Dr. Poley used something called the scanning electron microscope. It has many virtues for this kind of work, and not many researchers have used it. First of all, when you prepare the tissue for the scanning electron microscope, you don't have to subject it to as many washes and solutions and procedures as you do when you prepare tissue for light microscope and transmission electron microscope. So it's what we would call pure tissue. But the second thing the scanner does, the scanning electron microscope, it gives you a three-dimensional configuration. It's like roaming around on Mars with the rover. The question I'm asking is, can carbohydrate digestion proceed normally in celiacs, those with sensitivity to gluten, cow's milk protein, soy protein, those with Crohn's disease, intractable diarrhea of infancy, giardiasis, cystic fibrosis, and children with autism / digestive disturbances? In other words, can carbohydrate digestion proceed normally so that we don't continually feed the culprits down there that are adding to the problem? Here we have a three-dimensional view of those villi. Remember them? We only saw them in two-dimensional view. Here they are, finger-like projections, lying there under very low magnification, only 57 times normal. And it's a control child, healthy 3.5-year-old. The mucosal surface down there at the duodenum jejunal junction, which is the upper part of the small intestine. All villi appear of uniform height. The mucosal surface is free of mucus. I don't see much there, possibly a tiny dot. Where are we here? Tiny dot. Oh, darn this mouse. Okay. Okay, this may be a bit, but you don't see very much. However, here is the same magnification of the same area of a child, 4.5-year-old infant with soy protein intolerance. Oral tolerance tests. In other words, the child was given certain things to drink. He was given lactose, he was given sucrose in solution, and these oral tolerance tests always appear to be abnormal. In other words, I don't know what the doctors are doing today, but years ago they did a hydrogen breath test. And as soon as they gave the lactose, they could measure the hydrogen in the breath, which indicated bacterial fermentation. In other words, that lactose was not being cleaved and transported across the intestinal surface to feed our cells. It was going down to the fermentation tank and feeding the bacteria, which give off hydrogen. They did these oral tolerance tests, and they were always abnormal. The child reacted poorly. However, measurement of the enzymes per se, when they took the enzymes and put them in the laboratory, in the test tube, and measured them the way clinicians or researchers measure them, they seemed to be normal. Carbohydrate intolerance probably resulted from the inability of these sugars to make contact with the respective microvilli enzymes, and the sugars remain undigested in the center of the lumen, causing osmotic water retention and serving as an important energy source to microorganisms. Here we have a little higher magnification of the same surface. We still can't see my favorite cell too clearly, but every time you see a little circle here, that indicates an intestinal absorptive cell, and this is part of the villi. The cells appear flat. This is normal. There are goblet cells visible. Here's one here. You don't very often see constant cell renewal. You don't constantly see the cells sloughing off too quickly because of irritation. Here we go, 560 times on the scanning electron. Oh, this is a normal one too. We've honed in more. We now are 4,600 times magnification, and we now see the individual cells. Do you see them here? Do you see the little fuzzy coat, which is called the glycocalyx? That's where the last step in carbohydrate and some protein digestion takes place. And what do we see here in this normal, healthy child? We see a goblet cell spurting out its mucus. Cell borders are clearly visible of these cells. The tips of the microvilli are covered with enzymes under normal condition. Same magnification of a child with soy protein intolerance. You no longer see the projections, they flattened out. You cannot see much, if any, of the intestinal cell borders as we saw in the previous picture. You don't see these at all. And it's the same magnification. And we also see colonization of the surface of the mucosa with cocciform microorganisms arranged singly in pairs and in short chains. We're switching back now to a two-dimensional picture, the transmission electron microscope, showing the microvilli. Where are we? Here are we? Here. Okay, here we are, the microvilli. Okay, down here. And we see all these happy families of culprits showing microorganisms colonizing in the dense layer of mucus covering the microvilli. There are cocci, bacilli, and some of them are making babies like crazy. Child with chronic diarrhea, back to low magnification with the scanner again. We see wasting away of the finger-like projections. Carbohydrates secrete a considerable secretion of mucus. You see the strands of mucus here? generalized disaccharidase deficiency, as well as colonization of mucosa surface by microorganisms. Beginning of mucus barrier between okay. What is happening here is that the cells are trying to make contact with the carbohydrate disaccharides, and the mucus is presenting a barrier, and they can't do that. 10 more minutes. Wow, I'm almost done. Okay. Here we have again low magnification of a child with soy protein intolerance. You only see remnants of the villus ridges, flat mucosa, no tall ridges, and a general depression of disaccharidase activity. Here we have a close-up, 15,700 magnification with the transmission electron microscope of a celiac child. We don't see mucus here because you very seldom can see it with the light microscope or with the transmission electron microscope. It's washed away. But we do see that the little microvilli, which hold the enzymes, here we are, right here, they have practically disappeared. The cells are flattened. There is clumping of the microvilli. There is no what we call fuzzy coat over them, and exposure of the microvilli and brush border membranes, which are intimately associated with the activity of the enzymes. Depression of disaccharidase activity. Breaks in the surface coat of the microvilli in the vicinity of the microorganisms. These breaks could function again as entry points for macromolecules like proteins, which stimulate the immune system to go crazy, which then could initiate cellular changes and or damage to the mucosa by direct toxicity of immediate or delayed hypersensitivity. Often microulcerations and death of the intestinal absorptive surface and cells were seen, but the cause of this is unclear. A variety of factors, including microbial toxins, may be responsible. Oh boy, chronic diarrhea, a child with no diagnosis other than chronic diarrhea. Large areas of intestinal surface are covered with thick and tenacious appearing mucus. Only the outlines of the villus ridges are visible. The child was clinically intolerant to lactose and sucrose, and this is important. When the child ingested these disaccharides, immediately there was I shouldn't say immediately, I don't know what the time period is, but there was, in time, hydrogen production and other symptoms. Although, when the enzymes were removed and put in the test tube and tested, the activity of the enzymes were normal. So it is important for these enzymes to be evaluated. It is also important to know that there is another factor, such as this mucus production, which can stop the complete digestion of carbohydrates. Excessive production of intestinal mucus and its interaction with the intestinal cell surfaces may result in the formation of a barrier to nutrients. It prevents nutrients from getting through. Even the vitamins, which don't need digestion, can't get through. This has been recently described in human giardiasis, and a similar barrier possibly exists on the mucosal surface in certain patients with cystic fibrosis. And now I'm going to get political and mean. I have been to cystic fibrosis meetings, and it is true that these children have a hard time gaining weight. And I have sat there biting my tongue when the dietitian up front said, we've got to get weight on these kids, instant chocolate pudding, candy bars, etc., etc., etc. This has got to stop. Dr. Haas, Dr. Haas had 4 patients. He documented it in his textbook. I have his textbook with me, 1951, where he had 4 cystic fibrosis patients that were getting well. I don't know what the eventual outcome would be, but you cannot feed sick people that kind of a diet just to get weight on them. There are other ways to get weight on them. Chronic diarrhea, again, excessive mucus on the mucosa inhibits contact of the carbohydrates with disaccharidases, resulting in clinical intolerance, etc., etc., etc. Okay. We'll skip these. Okay. In my book, I have this diagram, which it makes it a little easier to understand, of how these disaccharides, many of them, most of them coming from starch, reach the intestinal surface, and in a healthy person, they get broken down and go into the bloodstream as single units to give energy to the rest of the body. With an unhealthy person, you have the loss of the microvilli, you have the mucus barrier, which prevents the cleavage or the breakage of those disaccharides, and you have them remaining in the lumen of the intestine, drawing water in, causing all kinds of osmotic diarrhea, and eventually getting down to feed the fermentation tank of microbes. So, in summary, the vicious cycle, round and round it goes. Where it starts, nobody knows. Does it start with injury to the small intestinal surface, which eventually, I've got the right glasses on, which eventually leads to impaired digestion of disaccharides, which leads to malabsorption of the disaccharides, which causes bacterial growth in the lower part of the intestine, and even in the upper intestine. We're seeing it all over the small intestine now, bacterial growth, which produces an increase in bacterial byproducts and mucus production, which again causes more injury to the intestinal surface. Our goal is to break the vicious cycle. Thank you.
Three weeks ago, as Dr. McCandless was washed off a bridge into a gorge in a rainstorm, her car turned over. She was about to be suffocated by the water, and a gush of wind and water came and moved the car just as she was about to drown. And that car was just a few feet from a waterfall, and it was on a little island. And she stayed there for 3 hours with her husband before she was rescued. So there is divine intervention. She's here with us today. She's an incredible woman. Similar stories to Elaine in the sense that Jacqueline was in the midst of raising 5 children and decided to go to medical school and become a neurologist and a psychiatrist, which she did. And then, as soon as you get a close look at her, you'll see she specialized in anti-aging medicine. She had a very successful career in Hollywood area doing that. But as fate would have it, in 1996, her 13th grandchild, Chelsea, developed autism. She became a medical detective, finding the answers that she needed for her own granddaughter, and then, in turn, the answers for all of you. She wrote the wonderful book, Children with Starving Brains, and we're so glad to have you here and to have you alive. Dr. McCandless.
Here's Chelsea. She's the little lady that got me into all of this. My 13th grandchild. She hadn't spoken a word. She had 2 older brothers, and she had 2 older sisters, and so the doctors just said, oh, her sisters are talking for her. Some kids talk late. Diarrhea, never stopped. Oh, just toddler diarrhea. She'll get over it. You know how it goes. I'm sure many of you have had the same situation. Anyway, I finally just got desperate and forced my daughter Liz, they live in Phoenix, Arizona, to let me take her to UCLA, and the doctor at UCLA looked at her in 15 seconds and said, classic autism. Well, my life certainly changed from that point on. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about Actually, it's all in my book, so I could actually talk about my accident. And you could just go read my book, and everything is in there, and it's been updated. I was in Hawaii updating my book as of March of this year, and Dr. Dees and Dr. James had been kind enough to correct all my stuff that I'd written in there about methylation science, and so it's all in there. But anyway, I want to talk to you about coordinating healing strategies, because thing is, I have all this stuff here. Oh, here's some. This is what's really interesting. This is pictures of my kids. This is Liz, my daughter Liz. She's my fourth daughter. Leslie's my first daughter. And this are her two little girls, and this is Chelsea in her arms.
We're going to have to change the resolution, so why don't you talk and I'll do what I
Okay.
can.
Anyway, the other picture, can you see the pictures?
Well, no, I'm going to change the resolution. So why don't you talk and I'll change
Okay.
it.
Anyway, what I'm here to tell you is that in medical school, we dissect cadavers, and we, they put this body in formaldehyde, and then you dissect out the heart, and then you dissect out the lungs and the bones and whatever. But we know all the time that all these things work together. So for purposes of working with our kids, to help you, I try to divide it up into the four main categories that these kids' problems fall into. And these are sick kids. They have gut problems, they have metabolic problems, they have toxicity problems, and they have immune and viral problems. So they have all these all at the same time. But for healing strategies, we kind of have to start with what's most important and go from there. And you've just heard Elaine talk to you about the complexity of the human gut, and it all begins with the gut. And so the very first thing we have to do in starting to heal these kids, people will hear about, oh, they have mercury, they'll rush, the phone was ringing off the hook when this first came out. I wanted to bring my kid in and get that mercury out. Oh, I say, well, you have to do this, this, this. They get very disappointed. If you don't get the gut healed first or well on its way to healing, you can't barrel into antivirals, anti-toxicity measures, all of these other exotic treatments that we know about. We have to do the work on the gut first. So absolutely, number one is the diet. And so when I first started this on my healing, my growth, learning growth, I was trying to work with kids on all levels, and the parents who were really diligent about putting the kids on the gluten-free, casein-free diet, their kids were getting better faster. They didn't have as many yeast infections. And I just fought forever trying to do a lot of chelation with these kids, with the constant yeast infections, and I finally just became very tough, and as I became very famous and could have all the patients that I wanted and had a long waiting list, I finally decided to write the book because I couldn't take any more patients. But I could say, don't even bother calling me until you have your child stabilized on a gluten-free, casein-free diet, because we'll all work hard, you'll spend tons of money, and I'll spend tons of time, and we'll waste time. And I found over and over and over that the parents who are willing to take the sugar away from their kids and get them on a restricted diet diligently get well faster. And there are always a few exceptions that, was it Judy, your patient, was talking about, no matter what you do, they have problems. And so these kids they just have a special need for a lot more restricted diet. But I am so grateful that we have Elaine and her work. She's our new goddess here to tell us how to work with the kids that just don't get better. But I'm here to tell you that I've mainstreamed plenty of kids on the gluten-free, casein-free diet. But I'm very mean. I don't let them have sugar, and I do a lot of 90 food IgG testing, and if they're not supposed to have corn, I take that away. If they're not supposed to have rice, I take that away. So I think I've had a higher success rate than some people because I test the heck out of the kids, and I take away everything that they're not supposed to have. So I've probably been approaching what you're doing, but not with, but you know, people were writing me a long time ago about the SCD diet, but as a writer, I get all kinds of, please, tell people that swimming with the dolphins will cure their kids. Tell people that eating this certain thing or doing that certain thing. So I wasn't paying any attention to it until finally one of my patients, Pam Farrow, her kid had this miraculous recovery, and she just became this total disciple. And so I say, hey, if she can help Isaiah, I got to look at this. So, you know, that's what we look at. Anything that will help a child, I'll look into it. And I've also looked into crystals and voodoo and all kinds of healing and, you know, taking Chelsea to Brazil and to Mexico. And, I mean, I'm into anything that will heal these kids. And I'm not particular, but if it heals them, I'm all for it. And one of these days, I might even take a computer class and learn how to operate a computer. But I've never had problems with my computer before, so I think it must be your electric plug or something. Okay. And when I first got into this, I got on the internet. And the internet is a great place. I advise everyone in here to get on the internet. You will find all the latest things. And get on a support group with other mothers. You'll have a question in the middle of the night. You can put it out. You'll get replies from all over the world because there aren't any mothers, there isn't any mother who has a problem who won't find some other mothers who've had that problem too. And mothers helping, and fathers too, but mainly moms, I must say, helping other parents, it's an inestimable source of comfort and reassurance and knowledge. And although I do have to say that something that helps one child, everybody will rush to do that for their child, and it won't work. Every child is so individual. No matter what you do, you'll have some child that won't respond to what you do, no matter what you do. And so we get these great treatments, and they will help some children, and there will always be a handful that not only do the treatments not help, but the kids get worse, and you just can't understand it. Our kids are extremely complex. And the reason they're complex is, okay, well, maybe I'll just have to wing it. What'd you say? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, then I'll see what I'm supposed to say. Okay, gut, metabolic disorders, I've already told you that. This is all so obvious. You have to do a history, do an exam, and lab testing. Now, I work by myself. I've always been a lone practitioner, and I educated myself through laboratory testing. I tested kids, and I saw what the test said, and then I saw what I did and how it helped, and I tested again and saw how it worked. And I really do, I love the laboratories. They have wonderful people who help me understand what the laboratory tests mean. And very early on the internet, I discovered Teresa Benstock, who'd been doing a lot of research on the immune system and viruses and so on, and I got in touch with Teresa, and Teresa was helping me with some tests and with some of my tough cases in the beginning, and she helped me learn that what is the best is to do all tests at the same time. I would get kids and they'd had a test 2 years before and hadn't been able to find anyone to help them interpret it. Well, 2 years ago, those tests are not really useful. And what I do now that I can, like I say, do what I want, if I get a new patient, I do a whole battery of tests. This is expensive, but in the long run, it pays because you see what it all is working at the same time. What's happening with the gut, what's happening with the brain, what's happening with the toxicity, and then you can work out a treatment plan. Now, this would not be advised for somebody who's never started the diet. Everybody that I see, they've already been stabilized on the GFCF diet and they've started some basic nutrients. So then when I test them, then I can fine-tune that and I can see how toxic they are, what is going on with the gut, whether they still have bugs or not, so on and so forth. And then I can lay out a treatment plan. And the very first always is one thing that's really hard in making the diagnosis of these kids is that there's a delay between the point of injury and the evidence of harm. Mercury is a slow neurotoxin, so babies, of course, can't do anything, and if they don't look at you, you don't think that much. So it's slow, and it comes on very slowly, particularly people who have their first child who has autism. They don't have that much to compare to. Parents who have 1 or 2 children before, they know usually pretty soon before anyone else, but they can't believe it, and we're all in denial. We don't want to accept that our child does have something wrong with them. So we put it off and we delay and we believe the doctor when they say, oh, the kid's all right. And we know it's not true. But anyway, the delay between the point of injury and the point of injury is so incredible. What happens with the mercury, it injures the gut right away and it lowers the immune system. So right away it sets off a cacophony of problems that these kids are going to have for years and years and years. It sets off, the immune system can't fight off the colds, so these kids will have ear infections. Chelsea had 11 ear infections in her first year of life. And of course, we didn't know anything. She had antibiotics. Well, antibiotics also injure the gut, and they lower the immune system. Now, if a child occasionally absolutely has to have antibiotics, I encourage the parents to get an injection if they can. The oral antibiotics are very injurious to the gut and to the immune system. So that delay between the point of injury and the evidence of harm really has mystified us for a long time. And the simultaneity of disorders, the fact that the immune system is impaired and the gut is impaired and the brain isn't getting nourished, they're not taking in the vitamins and things that they need, all of this happens at the same time. So we have to really be a detective to find out really what's going on with our kids, because so much is going on at the same time. And there's variability, like I said. Some kids will do wonderfully. Vitamin B6, I read Dr. Rimland's report on vitamin B6. We gave Chelsea vitamin B6. She stopped tearing around. It was absolutely amazing. Within hours of taking that, we saw a difference in her, and that was the moment I knew this is a biochemical issue. Something's wrong with the chemistry in her brain. And I knew that Chelsea wasn't a cold mother. I'd given that up a long time ago. She had 2 great kids. So we do the diet, and first we get them stabilized on the diet, and usually kids will make a really good response. I've had hundreds of letters. As soon as I started the diet, my child looked at me, stopped flapping. It was wonderful. Then they'll plateau, and then we check to see if there's something else they're not supposed to have, and often they're supposed to take out other things besides the gluten and the casein. Soy has I found out in testing, almost every kid was intolerant to soy. So now I just say GFCF, SF, because soy goes. Corn is the next one. And pretty soon, that's the way it goes. You start eliminating things that the kids can't tolerate. And I do a lot of testing for the gut bugs, treat them very vigorously, and learned that vigorous natural means in between the times of the systemic treating of antifungals really kept the yeast and Clostridia population down. So we all, and I learned a lot of this from the mothers. The mothers on the internet would say, oh, Aquaflora helped my kid. What's Aquaflora? Well, it's a homeopathic yeast treatment. But if you, it won't help if you have a deeply colonized yeast infection. But if you give the Aquaflora in between and a few drops of grapefruit seed extract and lauricidin. Lauricidin is one of my standbys. It's an antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial. Practically all of my kids are on that. I think it's a wonderful drug. That one you don't have to stop like you do the grapefruit seed extract or the uva ursi. You only could do those 2 weeks on, 1 week off, or you'll kill off all the good bugs. But lauricidin is totally tolerable and one of my favorites. So anyway, we start going down the line of all the things that the kids need. They need nutrients, and I would test to see what they need. And I would tell you some of the things that I test for. These are some of the tests that I do. Amino acid analysis. I have rarely tested a child that isn't deficient in some important amino acids. And what I almost always recommend is a customized amino acid formula for the kids at first. Give them what they need. And that's easy to get. Usually we're at the testing place. We'll have some place they'll tell you where you can get a customized amino acid formula, and you have to go very slow with these when the kids have been really deficient. And I want to say something else to the parents. If you have a child that has a really bad reaction to something right away, you don't immediately say, that's terrible, they're not ever to have that again. When kids are so deficient in something, when they first get it, all systems are overloaded and they overwork, and the kid will have a reaction. Now my motto is start very low and go very slow. And you start with just a little bit of the amino acid formula. You don't give what the company tells you to give. You give like 1/8 of a teaspoon twice a day on an empty stomach, and then you gradually work it up to 1/4 of a teaspoon, because when they're really deficient, sometimes it's just too much for the system to take in something that they've been deficient in a long time and they have a bad reaction. That does not mean they're not to ever have it again. It just means you start lower and go slower, because if a test says they need it, they probably do need it. Fatty acid analysis, I do that. Almost all the kids are deficient in the omega-3s. They have an imbalance in their omega-3s or omega-6s. They'll have some bad fatty acids. You remove the red meats or whatever, the hydrogenated oils. Canola oil is poison. I don't let the kids have any of it. What I like the best now is macadamia nut oil and coconut oil are the main ones that I use for the diet. And do the organic acid analysis, and this is a gold mine of information. It tells you the citric acid cycle, tells you the neurotransmitters, it tells you toxicities. It gives you lots of information. I think if there were one test that really gives me the most information, it also tells you the yeast and Clostridia population, and tells you whether you need to go vigorously in with the systemic antifungals, and then the vitamin panel. Almost all the kids are low, vitamin A, E, C, and the coenzyme Q10. They're almost all low on that. And so we start adding all these things to them. We give them vitamins, the minerals. All of them need lots of zinc. Dr. Walsh at Pfeiffer has really clued us in to how important the zinc is. It operates in about 200 different systems in the body, extremely important for the immune system. So zinc in good doses is one of the main things that I start right away on all the kids and build it up. Usually try to give 20 milligrams plus 1 milligram per pound plus 20, work up to that to give them enough zinc for what the system needs. And particularly in any kind of chelating program or detox program, zinc is extremely important. And another thing, these kids have to be well mineralized before you start a lot of these healing programs, particularly the detox programs. So then we started learning in the last couple of years about the methylation cycle, folic acid deficiency, the need for methylcobalamin. Dr. Baker had told us long ago, there's no way to test for vitamin B12 deficiency. Just give your kids give them a shot of vitamin B12 and see how they respond. Well, we have come to know the absolute essentialness of the methylcobalamin. That's the only form of vitamin B12 that goes into the brain. And then Dr. Deeth and Dr. James have shown us the chemistry of what we were finding out clinically. And I wrote to Jill James and I said, oh, we're so happy to have you guys help us. She said, well, the researchers need the clinicians too. We work together and we are coming up with answers. And it's extremely exciting with what's happening. Anyway, we had come up with what was really helping the kids. They all have a deficiency of glutathione. It's absolutely essential protein that's necessary in the liver for helping the body detox itself. So the methylation treatment that we use, Trio, I called it at first glutathione, alpha-thiamine, and methylcobalamin. Glutathione, I always give it to all kids orally because even though only 20% goes in, it really helps the gut. And the gut loves glutathione. I give the kids 150 milligrams twice a day. Usually start with 75 twice a day. Some kids have an intolerance to glutathione. Then when Dr. Jim Newbrander really became this missionary for the methylcobalamin, we found that a lot of kids that couldn't tolerate glutathione, once we would give them some methylcobalamin for a couple of months, they tolerated the glutathione just fine. And it's a terrific combination. We would see enormous benefit when we could get the glutathione and the methylcobalamin in these kids at the same time. The alpha-thiamine, it's a Dr. Derek Lonsdale created this. It's a synthetic garlic formula mixed with vitamin B1. And he did a study using rectal suppositories with the alpha-thiamine, found out that a lot of metals were coming out. Now, he says it's not a chelator. It's not an official chelator, but somehow it helps the body system start detoxing itself. It's benign. And then Lauren Underwood and the chief pharmacist at Coastal Compounding came up with a transdermal concoction of the alpha-thiamine, or TTFD, and it helps the metals come out in a kind of a variable way. All the metals come out in their own way because every child's chemistry is so different. So the alpha-thiamine would cause a lot of cadmium to come out, a lot of arsenic particularly, and then the mercury would gradually start coming. But it's not a heavy-duty chelator like the DMSA or the DMPS, but I have all my kids on alpha-thiamine. I have them all on glutathione, I have them all on methylcobalamin. So then Dr. Deeth and Dr. James started doing their experiments and joining our efforts here, and Dr. Deeth showed very elegantly how mercury kills off the methionine synthase enzyme, which is so important in the folic acid cycle. And so we started learning why all our kids are so sick and so deficient in the important minerals they need to get well. So then Dr. James did some very wonderful experiments, giving the kids folinic acid and TMG, and she showed that she could almost normalize the development of glutathione to get the kids up to what the regular kids would have with this concoction. So now we call it the quintet. So the quintet is glutathione, the TTFD, methylcobalamin injected. We found much better. Jim has found, and I have found. We've tried the oral. Most of these kids' guts are impaired. They cannot take in the methylcobalamin by oral form. Sublingual, well, too much sugar, because for kids to take, anyway, to get these kids to hold anything under their tongue, it's not that easy. They swallow it right away, so it goes into the gut. You have to give them a ton of sugar, tons more. So we found the injections really work. And people say, oh, injections, I could never give injections. Well, let me tell you, thousands of mothers and some dads who never thought they would give injections are giving their kids injections just as much as they need. And some of the kids, the more high-functioning kids, they'll come up and bring the stuff and say, shot. They know, they feel better after the shot. It's amazing. And you'll be hearing kids are smarter than we are sometimes. It's mostly the parents that are afraid of the needles. These little tiny needles are like little hairs, 30 gauge, 1/4 inch, and some brilliant pharmacists worked with Dr. Newbrander to get it concentrated down so it's like a drop, and you go, and the kid doesn't even know what hits them. So it's the parents' fear of the needles. Before the last conference, I called 3 of our favorite pharmacists just to get a number, and I found 1,450 kids were getting methylcobalamin injections, so just from those 3 pharmacies. So don't think it's something that not too many people do. But anyway, Jim will regale you this afternoon of the glories of methylcobalamin, and more and more and more we're finding out the essentialness of this compound. And it's very exciting that he had the nerve to start giving the kids methylcobalamin first thing off while he was doing all the other testing, and a lot of them got a lot better. So you'll be hearing about that. Oh, here's Chelsea. I don't know what's happening with here. This doesn't make any sense. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about the toxic accumulation. These kids, besides having messed up guts, and besides being low in their nutrients because they're not absorbing the things their brains need, they cannot get rid of heavy metals and toxins. So people will read a test, they say, where does that come from? Well, we are all taking in all kinds of crap all the time. We breathe it from the exhaust, it comes in the foods, it comes in through, if they spray crops in Spain in 4 days, it's traveled across to here. So, we are living in a toxic world, and I really do feel at times that these children, in the huge numbers that they're coming in, are a message to the world. Your world is getting toxic, and your kids are the ones that are showing it. They're like the canaries in the mines that the miners take down to the miners take the canaries down in the mines. When the canaries start dying, they know they better get the heck out of there because they're running out of oxygen. Well, this is what our kids, in 500,000 of them or however many we have, they're saying to us, the world is toxic, what you're feeding your kids is toxic, the air we're breathing is toxic, and we've got to do something about the toxicity in the world, or we're all going to be just as sick as our kids are. And if we keep letting those emissions go out and putting mercury out, as the present administration is allowing, I'll get a little political here, there won't be a fish in the world left that anyone can eat that isn't filled with mercury. So we have to do something on a larger scale. We are all focused on healing our child, but there is a much larger problem, that there is so much ignorance about what's going into the food, what's going into the crops, what's going into the soil, and we all have to really pay attention to that. And if I were 52 instead of 72, I would become a political activist and be out there screaming and hollering about the toxins that are going on in the environment. So I believe in saving a forest for a special owl myself. Yeah, well, I have to. I went into anti-aging medicine because I have to live long enough to heal Chelsea, because she's still not perfect, right? She's perfect in her way, but Chelsea is still impaired. We think that it started when her mom had amalgam work done when she was 4 months pregnant with Chelsea. I mean, what do we know? She didn't ask me anyway. She lives in Phoenix. She didn't ask me, I've got to go to the dentist. But anyway, we think that that's where Chelsea got her hit, because she was impaired from the beginning. She's not a regressive like most of you guys have. She never regressed. She just never did anything. I mean, she never said a word until she was 3 years old. So now she can say quite a bit, and she's beautiful, and she can sing and dance and say she wants to go to Tower Records and get her favorite CD that week. But what Chelsea doesn't do is make social conversation. And I just have to keep working until she can actually say, I'm fine, Grandma, school was great today. But she'll come in, and I'll say, hi, how are you? And she'll say hello, and then she says, I want to play on the trampoline. She won't just make social conversation, and I miss that in her. But we communicate at very deep levels. And when I had my accident, she in Phoenix, the accident was in Hawaii. She was in Phoenix. She was ballistic all day long, and her mother said, we don't know what's wrong with her. And that night, neither Liz or Chelsea could sleep at all. And as soon as we told her about the accident, she said, that's it. She's so tuned into us that she was, and Liz sat down and told her, Grandma and Grandpa were in a very serious accident. They were taken to the hospital, but they said they're fine now. And she listened, and she just got fine, and she was just fine after that. So she's very, very tuned in on a psychic level, and I'm sure most of you find that with your kids too. They're extremely sensitive, and they know what happens. They may look away and act like they don't know, but these kids know so much. It's just incredible how deeply wise they are. And so Jack and I had been working in Hawaii and doing a lot of meditating and praying and counseling on how to work with healing on another level, how to move into another level of consciousness. And so we really feel that the accident was, be careful what you ask for, because Mother Nature will come through, and Mother Nature is not sentimental and it's not specific. It's just a huge, massive, wonderful energy, and you have to know how to use it. So if you ask for it, you better be wise enough and conscious enough to be able to use it and use it properly. And that was the message we got. And our love held us together in the accident to get us through something that no one could think we could survive for. And I just knew I had to get Chelsea well, and I had to be here at this meeting. So what could I do? What do I do? Anyway, I've always had a lot of love and a lot of wondrous people in my family, but when Chelsea came along, she did open a part of my heart that I had never discovered before, and I just find that these kids affect me that way. They're so innocent, they're so beautiful, and they are like messengers from the spiritual world in some way. They're to really tell us, to make us grow, to be bigger people, to be better people. And I've seen my daughter Liz, who is into, pretty clothes like her mom and shopping and all that, she has become a deep and profound and wise and wonderful woman from the challenges of raising this autistic child. She has 3 other kids too, so her hands are full. But this is Liz. My daughter Liz, and there's Chelsea. This is a recent picture. And Chelsea's trying on skirts Leslie made. My daughter Leslie here is a clothing designer. They're trying on clothes. See some other pictures here. Oh, here's the accident. Here's where the water washed across. And it's a picture to your right. It says High Adventure. We live in Hawaii, and we have to have a fence around our property because there's wild pigs. So I got out it was pouring rain, 11 inches in 3 hours. I got out of the car to open the gate, got completely drenched, and this is right outside our house. This is the bridge to the left. There was water going across the road, but we thought we could get by it. And my husband said, I'm going for it, and I just held on. I didn't have my seatbelt on yet, and it hit the bridge. The water, a big wave hit the bridge. We rolled over here. We rolled down here. You can see on the left one on the top. We rolled down here, and then we rolled down here. And that little white spot you see back in the trees, that's our car on its side. And then this is a few days after. The water's already gone down now. But my grandson, one of my grandchildren, went on beyond the car and showed you the waterfall. Here's the car right here in the far right, lying on its side, and the tree they had to get a monkey to come over and climb the trees and get us because water was gushing on both sides. We're on this little island with the car sitting there, afraid to breathe. We're afraid we're going to be washed on, and they. I'll tell you, it was quite incredible. They took a halter around me and strung a rope across this gushing river with this waterfall and towed me across the river into the ambulance. Anyway, the most exciting thing that ever happened in my life. That was 3 weeks ago. Anyway, and this is my darling husband. He's writing a book about me and Chelsea right now. That's his cosmic assignment right now. Chelsea and he have an incredible relationship. He took 6 months out of his life to go to Phoenix, and it was called GASP, Grandpa's After School Program. And he picked her up every day from school, and he worked with her and helped her start eating some new kinds of food. He would give her supper, and then he would bring her home for bedtime. He did that every day after school, swam with her. This was just last summer, 6 months. He stayed with her, and they have a very, very deep and incredible relationship. Anyway, we'll get back to this stuff. I'd much rather talk about my family. I'm going to go back to the toxics, because a lot of you, you can get your kids on the diet, and you can start a lot of nutrients, and you can treat for yeast. And the big mystery is how to get those metals out. And this is what really stumps a lot of parents, and that's where you really do need professional guidance, even more than anything. You need to test to see if your child does have metal poisoning. And I used to use the hair analysis and the RBC minerals to check to see if there were an accumulation of toxins. And now I use the Immunosciences metallothionein function test, and that will show up whether the metallothionein in their body, which helps the body do its own detoxification, is functioning at a normal level. And kids where I will do the RBC minerals and the hair analysis won't show for sure that they have metal toxic accumulation. I will do the metallothionein function test. And if that shows that the metallothionein function isn't working well enough, 5 more minutes, then they do have to then they do need to be chelated. Now, I have all the kids on TTFD, and with the little guys, the TTFD often will be enough. By the time I've done that for 6 to 8 months to a year, the metals are down quite a bit. They go down more slowly. But if I get an older child with toxic accumulation, then I do use the DMSA. It's FDA approved. It's very safe. Dr. Cave has she's probably chelated 3,000 kids. It's an extremely safe medication. Don't let people tell you it's terrible and it's awful. We do have to check for liver function and for anemia and all those kind of things first. You always do that before you do any chelation program. These are the things you test for. And then if, say you have one spouse who doesn't believe the kid possibly has any metal, you can do the challenge, but really it's unnecessary, the challenge with provocation. And you'll see the metals pouring out. Sometimes your family doctor will need that too. Anyway, first you establish gut health, as I've said, and you assure nutritional status. Then you select your chelating agent, and the chelation protocol for the RE, what we've come up with, and we'll be coming up with a new and approved one pretty soon. That was done quite a while ago, but you can still go by that, and that is on the RE website. So immune assessment, we do need to check for a viral panel and see if the kids have high viruses, because sometimes you get the gut healed, you get the nutrition taken care of, you do the chelation, they're still not getting well, you need to see if they have a high viral infestation. Some kids have high HHV6, Epstein-Barr, the herpes 1 and 2, and then you get into the antivirals, and you occasionally hit the gold mine. As soon as you start the antivirals, you'll see enormous changes in the kids. And they're not always successful, but that's our 4th line of things we go into. Check for the measles antibodies, herpes viral screen, streptococcal peptides for pandas. And for pandas, we do the antibiotics. For the lymphoid nodular hyperplasia, well, this is a tough one. You usually have to go to the gastroenterologist and get some medications to get the inflammation down. Or if you start the diet, that can help a lot. And many of the kids that are pretty intractable, as Elaine have told you, when you get those special carbohydrates out, the kids start healing, getting rid of the chronic, deeply infested gut bugs. You do the antivirals. All of these things that you all have it in your book and in my book. Natural antivirals, I say lauricidin is the best natural antiviral. Prescription antivirals, Valtrex is an extremely safe drug. Again, you have to give it in good enough dose. Don't let somebody give you just a little small dose because the doctor's hesitant. You have to educate your doctors. You have to know what you want. You go in and you tell the doctor what you want and what you need, and you give them evidence. And Teresa's writing up a panel of papers. You can go in and you can give them 16 highly documented and good journals why they need to do this. The doctors just haven't had time to read it. And doctors have their egos, and they don't like to think there's a lot of stuff out there that they don't know about. They didn't hear about it in medical school, and most of their medical education will come from the drug rep who tells them the next drug to give. So you have to be smarter than your doctors. We have to get off of this thing to think that doctors are the big authorities that know everything. We don't. Many parents know a lot more than a lot of the doctors do. So you find out what your kid needs, and you go in and tell them, and if you can't find one that works with you, then you fire them and get another one. So immunomodulators. So these are all these things that we do. This is just a summary. We do the history, we order the tests, we start the restricted diet, we start the basic nutrients, we remove the offending foods, we treat the pathogen overgrowth, we adjust and add and fine-tune the nutrients that they need. Then we do the quintet for the methylation problems that all of these kids have. Then we chelate, then we do the antivirals. This is the way that I go. Now, a different child may come in, I may do the testing. If they have a huge antiviral a viral issue, I may start that sooner, but generally that's the way that I go. And the special advance, we use immune-enhancing nutrients, immunomodulation, and special kids do need endoscopy. Some kids use a SPECT exam. There is one doctor who gives SSRIs to everyone. We tried Chelsea on many SSRIs. I finally was given as a gift by Dr. Amen a SPECT exam, and he said, "Oh, don't ever give this kid SSRIs because it showed in her brain scan." Well, that's a $3,000 test, but it's often covered by insurance, where we can't get immune testing. We can't get that covered by insurance, but you can get a SPECT exam. They do have to anesthetize the kids, take a picture of their brain. They need EEGs. The kids with seizures have to have special treatment, of course. And the summary, gut health is first, diet, anti-infectives, metabolic is second, detoxification, then the immunocompetence, special, and extra special, prayer, love, and grace.